All women are different, but they are all women. This video is androcentric from a men's point of view and is presented as opinion, commentary, and debate. Expressing opinions is not violence. These are ideas to challenge, question, and argue in public, because classical liberalism relies on the First Amendment for its dialectic. If you are a feminist, then consider this. If patriarchy truly existed as claimed, feminism could not. And if all men are trash and women are equal to men, then what are we to conclude? Women will die for their children. Men will die for their wives and children, and God chose to die for all mankind. Authority rolls up with responsibility. If this framing of facts offends you, click off to a cute cat video. Proceeding further will expose you to gamma bias and criticism directed at ideas, claims, institutions, not at any individual's virtue or dignity. Our method follows the 7 liberal arts, the trivium, grammar, logic, rhetoric, and the quadrivium, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy, and the transcendentals, the good, true, and beautiful. If this framework is not for you, feel free to exit now. It's no disgrace. Women are wonderful. God bless America. Men are great. Feminismus delendis est. Emotional colonialism. Plundering male labor as reparations. Written by Connie Riker. Available now. Links in description. Patriarchy tax financial domination. Why the obvious became forbidden and what comes next. She said my speech was violence, so I stopped speaking, and she called that violence too. That, gentlemen, is not an argument. That is a trap disguised as moral instruction, a snare designed so that whatever you do, you lose, and whatever she does, she wins. Welcome to the terminal contradiction of the entire feminist woke apparatus, laid bare in one question they cannot answer without destroying their own theology. If male speech is violence, is your silence the absence of violence or the absence of the violator? Watch it land, watch them fumble, because either silence is peace, in which case their screaming rhetoric collapses and men simply walk away unburdened, or silence is itself an act of aggression, which means men are guilty existo, guilty for breathing. Guilty for existing, guilty for the crime of having been born with a voice capable of principled refusal. Dr.
Winona, the institutionally credentialed oracle of this whole parasitic cathedral, attempted to defend the position on a panel last spring.
Male speech, she explained with all the practiced serenity of someone who has never been cross-examined by a mind sharper than his softball podcast host, creates discomfort, and discomfort is harm, and harm is violence. Beautiful chain, pity it fails at every link. I asked her whether a woman's speech could similarly constitute violence. She said no, because power asymmetry. I asked whether a female HR manager writing up a male subordinate with no evidence constituted power asymmetry. She said that was accountability. I asked whether accountability required evidence. She said lived experience was evidence. I asked whether the accused's lived experience counted equally. She said the question itself was a form of violence. There it is, the circle closed.
The Kafka trap snapped shut around its own jaws. Here is what Dr. Winona cannot survive, and what every honest logician can see in 3 moves.
If male speech is violence because it causes harm, and harm is defined subjectively by the listener's emotional response, then any speech the listener dislikes becomes violence, which renders the category meaningless, because it now includes disagreement, criticism, silence, questions about the definition of violence, and eventually the very act of drawing breath in her vicinity. But if the definition requires a power asymmetry to qualify, then the female HR manager, the family court judge, the divorce attorney, the Title IX officer, the ex-wife with a restraining order based on felt fear, all of these wield institutional power no individual man possesses, and their speech, their accusations, their words must by this same logic be classified as violence. They will never accept this, and that refusal is the entire proof. The ideology does not want to end violence. It wants to monopolize the word violence as a weapon to silence dissent while committing actual structural aggression with institutional cover. It wants male speech criminalized and female coercion sanctified. It wants the boy who names the emperor's nakedness punished for noticing, and punished harder for not noticing. and punished hardest of all for asking which one it is. That question is silence, the absence of violence, or the absence of the violator, collapses the entire fraud into a single logical singularity from which no equivocation, no credential, no tearful appeal to safety can escape. What follows is the full audit, definitions pinned, syllogisms tested, standards sex-swapped, and every rhetorical escape hatch welded shut with the very logic they claim to despise. Dr.
When Nona brought feelings to a syllogism fight, it will not go well for her, the question. If male speech is violence, is your silence the absence of violence or the absence of the violator? Why it pops the ideology.
If male existence is defined by a haploidic, single, unshared, incomplete nature that is inherently deficient and violent, then the male capacity to recognize, articulate, or submit to that violence is itself a violent act of imposition, making the male subject both the aggressor and the victim of his own biology without agency. The child version. If talking is mean, is being quiet good, or are you just hiding? Follow-up questions. If silence is the only non-violent state, why do you demand I speak to prove I'm listening? If my breath is a weapon, do you want me to hold it until you say I'm safe? Is the violence in the word or in the ear that hears it? If I am haploidic and incomplete, how can I be trusted to define the violence? Are you correcting me, or are you consuming me? If every male action is violence, is your reaction to that violence also violent? Do you want the truth, or do you want the feeling? If I am the problem, why is the solution always my submission? Axis question bank. The haploidic deficit. Male incompleteness as inherent aggression. Best question. If male incompleteness is the source of violence, is the male who knows he is incomplete less violent than the one who doesn't? Does self-awareness reduce the violence of haploidic existence, or is the awareness itself a violent imposition of logic on emotion? Grammar, logical basis. Definition of agency, why it lands. It traps the male in a double bind. Ignorance is violence, knowledge is also violence. Is the haploidic state a biological fact or a rhetorical device to excuse female emotional volatility? Grammar, logical basis, burden of proof, why it lands. It shifts the focus from male deficiency to female fragility. The burden of translation, women as sole arbiters of meaning. Best question. If only women can accurately interpret male intent, is male speech merely noise until validated by female interpretation? If my words mean what you feel they mean, do I have any words at all? Grammar, logical basis, equivocation divided by loss of referent, why it lands. It dissolves the concept of communication into pure reception. Is the woman's interpretation infallible, or is it subject to the same discursive violence it accuses men of? Grammar, logical basis, non-contradiction, why it lands. It challenges the divine status of female perception. The unfalsifiable trap. Any male response is proof of violence. Best question. If silence is submission and speech is aggression, is the male subject permanently in a state of discursive war? What is the non-violent male state? Is it death, or is it merely waiting for permission to exist? Grammar, logical basis. Excluded middle, why it lands. It highlights the impossibility of the male condition under this theory. If every male action is interpreted through the lens of past violence, is new evidence possible, or is history eternal? Grammar, logical basis, induction divided by confirmation bias, why it lands. It exposes the static nature of the accusation. The asymmetry of correction, female critique is neutral, male defense is attack. Best question, why is the woman's correction a gift of clarity, but the man's correction a theft of authority? If I correct you, it's love. If you correct me, it's control. What is the objective difference in the act? Grammar, logical basis, special pleading. Why it lands. It isolates the double standard from the content of the speech. Is the male's defense a denial of fact or a denial of the woman's emotional reality? Grammar, logical basis, category error, fact versus feeling. Why it lands. It reveals the shift from truth to mood. The spatial violence, presence as intrusion. Best question, if male presence is violent, is the male body a weapon or a wound? Does the male occupy space by force, Or is space itself defined as female until male intrusion occurs? Grammar, logical basis, presupposition divided by ownership, why it lands. It questions the default state of the world. If breathing is an act of taking oxygen from the environment, is all life violent? Grammar, logical basis, reductio ad absurdum, why it lands. It expands the definition of violence to absurdity. The emotional sovereignty, female feeling overrides objective fact. Best question. If feeling is fact, is the woman's emotion a discovery or a creation? If my anger proves I am right, does your calm prove you are wrong? Grammar, logical basis, affirming the consequent why it lands. It links emotion directly to truth value. Is the male's job to manage the female's emotion or to be the object of it?
Grammar, logical basis, role ambiguity, why it lands. It exposes the functional role of the male in this schema. Dr. Winona attempts the defense on discursive violence and the urgency of listening by Dr. Winona, feminist Marxist, PhD, Professor of Gender Studies. I have spent 23 years in the academy studying how power reproduces itself through the seemingly innocuous.
What I and my colleagues have documented rigorously, exhaustively, is that male speech is never merely speech. It carries within it the entire weight of patriarchal structural conditioning. When a man speaks, he is not exchanging information, he is occupying space. He is reasserting a primordial entitlement to define reality, to name the world, to colonize the interpretive field. This is what we mean by discursive violence, and let me be clear, it is not a metaphor. What my critics, and they are legion, organized and predictably male, deliberately misunderstand is that violence need not leave a bruise to be violence. Violence is any act that forecloses another's epistemic sovereignty. When a man explains, corrects, disagrees, or even defends himself against a woman's account of her experience, he is committing discursive violence. He is, through the very mechanism of his speech, overriding her reality with his own. Now, some have asked, always in bad faith, always with that telltale fragility, is there anything a man can say that isn't violent? This question itself is discursive violence. It demands that the oppressed educate the oppressor, that the wounded provide a flow chart for the knife. It centers male comfort. It is, in its very structure, a demand that the woman justify her pain before it is recognized. The answer, of course, is that men can speak non-violently. They can listen, they can affirm. They can create space rather than fill it. They can recognize that their perspective, and here the science is settled, is fundamentally marked by what feminist epistemologists call haploidic incompleteness, a partial, single-valenced mode of cognition that mistakes its own narrowness for universality. The male mind, shaped by millennia of dominance, literally lacks the neural hermeneutic architecture to perceive the full texture of social reality. This is not opinion, this is the consensus of the field. What this means practically is that when a woman tells you what your words meant, what they did, your job is not to argue. Your experience of your own intent is simply not epistemically equivalent to her experience of your effect. The asymmetry is real, structural, and morally significant. Insisting otherwise is, again, discursive violence. I know this is difficult to hear. I know it provokes defensiveness. But I ask you to sit with that discomfort rather than weaponize it. The fact that you feel attacked by this analysis does not refute it, it confirms it. Your resistance is the system recognizing itself. So when a woman falls silent, when she withdraws from the conversation, do not mistake that for peace. That silence is not the absence of violence. It is what remains when the violator has made speech itself unsurvivable. The compassionate response, the only ethical response, is to stop demanding access to a discourse you have already poisoned, and to begin the long, humble work of believing. Theory critique. The silence that damns you, how discursive violence collapses under its own weight. The question. Every ideology has a load-bearing question, the one interrogative it cannot survive without changing its shape. For the doctrine of discursive violence, that question is this. If male speech is violence, is your silence the absence of violence or the absence of the violator? Hold this question like a blade.
We will return to it until the ideology bleeds out from every scene. The claim, as articulated by Dr. Winona, feminist Marxist, and her cohort, is that male speech is never neutral.
Every utterance a man produces carries within it the entire weight of patriarchal structural conditioning. When a man explains, corrects, disagrees, or defends himself, he commits discursive violence. Not metaphorically, she insists. Literally, violence need not leave a bruise to be violence. Violence is any act that forecloses another's epistemic sovereignty. So let us accept this definition provisionally and ask the only question that matters. If my speech is violence regardless of its content, if my defense against your accusation is itself a new act of violence, then what state remains to me that is not violent? And when I fall silent, as you eventually demand, is that silence proof the violence has stopped? Or is it merely proof the violator has been removed from the room? The ideology cannot answer this, and the reason it cannot answer tells you everything you need to know about what this theory actually is. Why the ideology cannot answer it. Let us run the question through the trivium. Grammar first, then logic, then rhetoric. Grammar, define the terms, violence, classically and legally defined, is the use of physical force to cause harm. The word derives from the Latin violentia, vehemence, force. Its core referent is bodily damage or the threat thereof. This matters. If you stretch the definition of violence to include speech that causes emotional discomfort, you perform an equivocation. You use one word to mean two radically different things, then trade on the moral weight of the first meaning to enforce compliance with the second. Discursive violence is not violence. It is offense, disagreement, or emotional discomfort reclassified as harm through linguistic sleight of hand. The grammar of the term is a bait and switch. Discursive sounds academic and therefore legitimate. Violence carries the moral urgency of a criminal charge. Welded together, the compound term does what all compound lies do. It borrows the authority of one category to police behavior in another. Logic tests the consequences. Here is the syllogism the ideology implicitly offers. Premise 1. All male speech is structurally conditioned by patriarchy and therefore constitutes violence. Premise 2. Violence must be stopped. Conclusion. All male speech must be stopped. But here is the problem. If all male speech is violent, including speech that disagrees, corrects, explains, or defends, then the only non-violent male act is silence. Yet Dr.
Winona herself writes that when a woman falls silent, this silence is not the absence of violence. It is what remains when the violator has made speech itself unsurvivable. Pause.
If her silence is evidence of his violence, then his silence is evidence of what? Of his compliance, or of his abandonment, of his contrition, or of his contempt. The theory gives us no way to distinguish. Male silence can be read as passive aggression, sulking, withdrawal, stonewalling, as further violence, abandonment, denial of access to discourse, or as the only permissible state. But if the first two readings are available, and they always are, because the interpretive authority belongs entirely to the female observer, then silence is not safe either. The male subject is trapped in a permanent state of discursive warfare where every possible action, including inaction, is evidence of his violence. This is what logicians call a Kafka trap. The structure of the accusation makes innocence impossible. Denial is guilt. Silence is guilt. Self-defense is guilt. Agreement is still guilt because it centers male comfort. The only acceptable male act is total epistemic surrender, the abdication of his own mind. And here is where the winning question delivers its killing stroke. If male speech is violence, is your silence the absence of violence or the absence of the violator? If silence is the absence of violence, then the theory concedes that male existence, not male speech, is the problem. The violence is not in the words, but in the man. Which means the proposed solution is not reform, but removal. Not better speech, but no speaker. If silence is merely the absence of the violator, then the theory has defined violence not as an act, but as an identity. And an identity-based theory of violence has no limiting principle. It cannot be refuted by behavior. It can only be obeyed temporarily until the next interpretation arrives. Rhetoric detect the power move. The entire framework is a power acquisition dressed in the language of compassion. Listen, affirm, create space, These sound like virtues, but translated into incentive structures, they mean relinquish your right to define your own intent, accept her interpretation as infallible, and pay the tax of permanent moral subordination.
Words are the interface, incentives are the source code. Dr. Winona's fallacy map. Let us dissect the article piece by piece, naming each maneuver with the precision of an anatomist exposing a tumor.
Equivocation on violence. Violence is any act that forecloses another's epistemic sovereignty. No, violence is the use of physical force. Redefining it to include foreclosing epistemic sovereignty is an act of definitional imperialism. It captures a vast territory of ordinary human interaction, argument, disagreement, correction, even having a different perspective, and brands it with the criminal severity of the original term. This is the foundational equivocation on which the entire theory rests, and it collapses the moment you refuse the redefinition. Test. If I tell you that your redefinition of violence forecloses my epistemic sovereignty, have I just committed an act of violence against you, or have you committed one against me by publishing this article?
The theory has no consistent answer. It only has a double standard, Mott and Bailey. Dr. Winona deploys this maneuver with practiced ease. The motte, men should listen to women and take their experiences seriously.
This is a reasonable, defensible claim that almost no one disputes. The Bailey, male speech is inherently violent, male self-defense is proof of guilt, and the only ethical male act is total epistemic submission to female interpretation. When challenged on the Bailey, she retreats to the moat, we're just asking men to listen. But the article's actual content demands far more than listening. It demands the surrender of the male capacity to interpret his own words, his own intent, his own reality. Circular reasoning. The fact that you feel attacked by this analysis does not refute it, it confirms it. Your resistance is the system recognizing itself. This is textbook circularity. The theory predicts resistance. The theory also predicts compliance. The theory predicts indifference as fragility masking privilege. There is no possible male response that disconfirms the theory. A theory that cannot be falsified by any possible evidence is not a theory. It is a dogma wearing academic robes. Formal structure. Premise 1, patriarchy conditions all male speech. Premise 2, if you resist this claim, your resistance is patriarchal conditioning proving the claim. Conclusion, the claim is confirmed by all responses. This is the epistemic equivalent of a coin that reads heads I win, tails you lose. It is unfalsifiable by construction and therefore carries zero probative weight. Ad hominem and genetic fallacy. What my critics, and they are legion, organized and predictably male. The sex of the critic is irrelevant to the validity of the argument. This is a genetic fallacy, dismissing an argument based on the identity of its source rather than its logical content. It is also a preemptive ad hominem. Characterizing critics as predictably male implies their objections are symptoms of their condition, rather than reasoned responses. Note the asymmetry. If a male critic dismissed a female scholar's argument by calling her predictably female, the academic establishment would treat this as disqualifying misconduct. Dr.
Winona performs the same maneuver and receives tenure for it. Special pleading. Your experience of your own intent is simply not epistemically equivalent to her experience of your effect. Why not? The claim is asserted, never argued. Dr. Winona asserts that female interpretation is epistemically superior to male self-knowledge, but she provides no argument for this asymmetry beyond the assertion itself.
If I claim that my interpretation of her words is more authoritative than her understanding of her own intent, the theory calls this discursive violence, but her identical claim reversed is treated as revelation. Same act, different standard. The theory demands that we apply one epistemic rule to men and its exact inverse to women. This is not justice. It is a racket, appeal to authority. Here, the science is settled. This is not opinion. This is the consensus of the field. The consensus of gender studies departments, disciplines that explicitly exclude dissenting perspectives, that define disagreement as violence, and that hire only those who already accept the framework, is not evidence. It is institutional, inbreeding presented as epistemic authority, a field that defines its critics as mentally defective, haploidic incompleteness, and expels them as violent cannot then cite its own unanimity as proof of its correctness. The unanimity is manufactured by the exclusion. Loaded language. Throughout the article, emotionally charged terms do the work that arguments cannot. Primordial entitlement, colonize the interpretive field. Overriding her reality, these are not neutral descriptions. They are verdicts dressed as observations. Each term presupposes the conclusion it claims to demonstrate. Colonize presupposes theft. Overriding presupposes illegitimate replacement. The rhetoric replaces the reasoning, and the reader is swept along by the moral force of the imagery without ever encountering a valid inference. The axis-by-axis Socratic cross-examination. Now we proceed through each structural axis of the ideology, deploying the questions that expose it. For each, I will explain why the question works on the level of grammar and logic, not merely rhetoric. Axis 1, the haploidic deficit, male incompleteness as inherent aggression. Question: does self-awareness reduce the violence of haploidic existence, or is the awareness itself a violent imposition of logic on emotion? Dr.
Winona claims the male mind is marked by haploidic incompleteness, a partial single-valenced mode of cognition that mistakes its own narrowness for universality.
The male mind, she writes, literally lacks the neural hermeneutic architecture to perceive the full texture of social reality. Let us grant this claim for the sake of destruction. If the male mind is structurally deficient, then any male thought, including the thought I am deficient, is the product of a deficient mind. The male who recognizes his incompleteness does so using the very faculty Dr.
Winona declares unreliable. His self-awareness is, by her own logic, unreliable. He cannot know he is incomplete because the faculty by which he would know this is itself incomplete. This is a performative contradiction.
The theory requires the male to accept a diagnosis delivered by a faculty the theory declares incapable of accurate diagnosis. The question exposes this. If self-awareness reduces violence, then the theory concedes male cognition can produce valid conclusions which contradicts the premise of haploidic incompleteness. If self-awareness does not reduce violence, then the theory demands the male recognize something he is neurologically incapable of recognizing, which makes the demand incoherent. Grammar check. Incompleteness is defined as a structural cognitive deficit. But the theory simultaneously demands that the incomplete mind perceive its own incompleteness, a full self-knowledge that, by definition, the incomplete mind cannot possess. The term is being used equivocally. Incomplete means deficient when describing the male, but complete enough to diagnose its own deficiency when prescribing male obligation. Logical check. This is a variant of the liar's paradox. The male mind cannot be trusted premise. The male mind must recognize it cannot be trusted conclusion. But if it cannot be trusted, its recognition is untrustworthy. If its recognition is untrustworthy, the demand for recognition has no epistemic foundation. Axis 2, the burden of translation, women as sole arbiters of meaning.
Question: if my words mean what you feel they mean, do I have any words at all? Dr. Winona writes, when a woman tells you what your words meant, what they did, your job is not to argue.
Your experience of your own intent is simply not epistemically equivalent to her experience of your effect. This claim severs the connection between speaker and meaning. If the female listener's interpretation of my words is authoritative and my intent is irrelevant, then I do not possess language. I emit sounds. She assigns them content.
My speech is not communication. It is raw material for her interpretive labor. But this destroys the possibility of all communication, including Dr. Winona's own article. If meaning belongs to the listener rather than the speaker, then Dr. Winona's words mean whatever I feel they mean. And I feel they mean a confession of intellectual dishonesty and a blueprint for tyrannical control.
By her own rule, she cannot argue her intent is irrelevant, only my reception matters. Grammar check. The word meaning has been equivocated.
In standard usage, meaning is a shared construct negotiated between speaker and listener. Dr. Winona redefines it as the sole property of the listener, but only when the listener is female and the speaker is male.
This is not a theory of communication. It is a theory of interpretive conquest. Logical check. The claim your intent is not epistemically equivalent to her effect is symmetrical. If her experience of the effect overrides his experience of the intent, then his experience of her word's effect overrides her experience of her intent. The theory applies the rule in one direction only, special pleading, of the most flagrant variety. The follow-up question Dr.
Winona cannot answer. Is the woman's interpretation infallible, or is it subject to the same discursive violence it accuses men of?
If infallible, then women are epistemic deities, a claim that is theological, not empirical. If fallible, then male correction of female misinterpretation is not violence but accuracy, and the entire framework collapses. Axis 3. The unfalsifiable trap. Any male response is proof of violence. Question: what is the non-violent male state? Is it death, or is it merely waiting for permission to exist? Dr.
Winona says men can speak non-violently. They can listen, affirm, create space. But examine what happens when a man does these things. If he listens, is he not still occupying space with his presence?
If he affirms, is his affirmation not still male speech, structurally conditioned, carrying patriarchal weight? If he creates space by removing himself, is his absence not abandonment or emotional withdrawal, which the therapeutic state reclassifies as a form of abuse? The theory creates a narrow corridor of approved male behavior. Listening without speaking, affirming without analyzing, present but silent, useful but invisible. But even this corridor is provisional. It exists at the pleasure of the female interpreter, who may at any moment reclassify his silence as resistance, his affirmation as patronizing, his presence as intrusion. This is why the question is lethal. It demands the theory specify the limiting principle. What precisely can a man do that is guaranteed not to be reinterpreted as violence? The theory cannot answer because it has no limiting principle. Its power lies precisely in its boundlessness, the permanent capacity to redefine any male act as aggression. Grammar check. Non-violent is undefined within the theory. It functions as a placeholder that can be filled or emptied at will by the female interpreter. A term without a stable definition is not a concept. It is a weapon. Logical check. This is the excluded middle. The theory presents two categories, violent male speech and absent male speech, but defines the first so broadly that it swallows the second. There is no third option. The theory has erased the middle ground where ordinary, imperfect, well-meaning human communication actually occurs. The follow-up: if silence is submission and speech is aggression, is the male subject permanently in a state of discursive war? Yes, that is the design. The permanence is the feature, not the bug. A permanently guilty subject is a permanently controllable subject. Axis 4. The asymmetry of correction. Female critique is neutral. Male defense is attack.
Question: why is the woman's correction a gift of clarity, but the man's correction a theft of authority? Dr. Winona corrects male behavior throughout her article.
She identifies errors in male perception, names them, prescribes remedies. This is correction. It is also, by her own definition, an act that forecloses another's epistemic sovereignty. She is overwriting the male reader's reality with her own interpretation. By the standards of her theory, her article is an act of mass discursive violence, but she does not see it this way. Her correction is analysis. Male correction is control. Her speech is scholarship. Male speech is occupation. The same act, identifying an error in another's reasoning and proposing a correction, receives opposite moral valences depending on the sex of the actor. Grammar check. The word correction is used univocally. It describes the same act regardless of who performs it. The theory applies two different moral labels to one act based solely on the identity of the actor. This is the definition of a double standard. Logical check. If correction is violent when performed by a man, it is violent when performed by a woman. The act does not change its nature based on the anatomy of the person performing it. To claim otherwise is to assert that morality is sexed, which is precisely the essentialism the theory claims to reject. The follow-up: if I correct you, it's love. If you correct me, it's control. What is the objective difference in the act? There is none. The difference is not in the act, but in the power relation the theory constructs to justify one-directional authority. Axis 5. The spatial violence, presence as intrusion.
Question: does the male occupy space by force, or is space itself defined as female until male intrusion occurs? Dr. Winona writes that male speech is occupying space, reasserting primordial entitlement to define reality.
The metaphor is spatial. The man takes up room. His presence is framed as an incursion into territory that rightfully belongs to others. But whose space is it? The theory never asks. It presupposes that discursive space is default female, that the room belongs to her until he enters it, that the conversation is hers until he speaks, that the interpretive field is her possession until his words trespass upon it. This is a presupposition of ownership, smuggled in through metaphor without argument. Grammar check. Occupying is a term that presupposes prior ownership by another. One can only occupy territory that belongs to someone else. The metaphor presupposes the conclusion that discursive space is female property without establishing it. Logical check. This is begging the question. The argument assumes what it needs to prove, that male presence in discourse is an incursion rather than a natural participation. If discourse is shared human territory, as the Western tradition from Socrates forward has held, then male participation is not occupation. It is citizenship. The follow-up: if breathing is an act of taking oxygen from the environment, is all life violent? The theory's logic extended consistently defines all consumption of shared resources as aggression. This is the reductio ad absurdum that exposes the framework as a complaint against existence itself, not against any specific male behavior. Axis 6. The emotional sovereignty, female feeling, Heuferser objective fact.
Question: if feeling is fact, is the woman's emotion a discovery or a creation? Dr. Winona's framework grants epistemic authority to female feeling. When a woman says she felt harmed, the feeling is the harm.
When she interprets a man's words as violent, the interpretation is the violence. Feeling is treated as a faculty of perception, a sixth sense that detects harms invisible to the rational mind. But emotions are not perceptions, they are responses, and responses can be calibrated or miscalibrated, proportionate or disproportionate, accurate or distorted by trauma, personality, agenda, or momentary volatility. To treat feeling as fact is to eliminate the distinction between experience and interpretation, the very distinction that makes honest discourse possible. Grammar check. Feeling conflates two distinct phenomena: sensation, I feel pain, and judgment, I feel threatened. The first is a physiological event, the second is an interpretation. The theory treats both as authoritative data, erasing the interpretive layer that is precisely where error, manipulation, and honest disagreement enter. Logical check. If feeling is fact, then contradictory feelings produce contradictory facts. If one woman feels complimented by a remark and another feels violated by the same remark, the theory cannot adjudicate. Both feelings are facts, both harms are real. The theory dissolves into radical subjectivism, where each individual's emotional response constitutes a private reality that cannot be questioned. This is not a theory of justice. It is a theory of interpretive anarchy dressed as compassion. The follow-up: if my anger proves I am right, does your calm prove you are wrong? The theory links emotional intensity to truth value, but only in one direction. Female emotion confirms truth. Male emotion confirms pathology. This is not epistemology, it is rhetoric serving power, the child test. Every ideology should be subjected to the child test. Translate its claims into language a 10-year-old can understand and see whether the resulting structure survives the child's sense of fairness. The claim: whenever a boy talks, he's being mean, even if he doesn't know it. If he says he wasn't being mean, that's also mean. If he stays quiet, his quietness is mean too. The only thing he can do is agree with whatever the girl says and never argue. The child's questions if talking is mean, is being quiet good, or are you just hiding? If he can't ever not be mean, do you want him to go away forever? Why is it nice when she fixes him, but mean when he fixes her? If she says hello, and he hears attack. Did she say hello? When am I not being bad? A child can see what a PhD cannot. A rule that makes innocence impossible is not a rule. It is a trap. And a trap designed for one sex, enforceable only by the other, enforced through institutions that claim to pursue equality, is not justice. It is a monopoly on accusation masquerading as a moral framework. The child knows something the professor has forgotten. If the game is rigged so you can never win, the rational move is not to play better. It is to flip the table and walk to a different game, one built on reciprocal standards, honest definitions, and the radical, unfashionable assumption that truth exists independent of how anyone feels about it. The blade that cuts returned to the question one final time. If male speech is violence, is your silence the absence of violence or the absence of the violator? Dr.
We known as ideology cannot answer because both answers destroy it. If silence is the absence of violence, the theory concedes that the problem is not speech but the speaker maleness itself, not male behavior.
If silence is the absence of the violator, the theory concedes that violence is not an act but an identity, and an identity-based theory of harm has no place in any civilization that claims to judge individuals by what they do rather than what they are. The theory of discursive violence is not an analysis. It is a demand for surrender, dressed in academic syntax, enforced by institutional power, insulated from refutation by definitional chicanery. It calls speech violence and violence speech. It calls male defense aggression and female accusation truth. It calls listening growth and disagreement harm. It inverts every standard the Western tradition spent 2 millennia building, standards of due process, of evidence before verdict, of the same rule for the same act regardless of who performs it. Reject the equivocation. Restore the definition, demand the same standard, and when they tell you your silence is violence too, smile, because you now hold the question they cannot answer, and the silence that follows is not yours. It is the silence of an ideology that has finally met a logic it cannot reclassify as harm. You have seen the contradiction. I showed it to you because you were ready to look. The question splits their logic like a mold through dry oak. If male speech is violence, then male silence must be either peace or proof that the violator has been removed. They cannot call it both. They cannot call it neither. Yet they will try, because the entire machinery of feminist speech policing depends on never being pinned to a definition that cuts both ways. So I reward you. You followed the syllogism to its fork, and recognized that the trap was never in the answer, but in their refusal to give one. That recognition is the first brick of a new institution. Now take the weapon. The next time someone tells you that your words are violence, do not retreat into explanation. Do not apologize for tone. Do not produce evidence to disprove an accusation that was never about evidence. Ask the question. Say it plainly. If male speech is violence, is my silence the absence of violence or the absence of the violator? Then stop talking. Let the silence you have now weaponized do the work their rhetoric could never survive. Watch them equivocate, pivot to intent, invoke feelings, summon a third party. Every maneuver is a concession, because every maneuver proves they never believed speech was violence. They believed your voice was inconvenient and called it a crime. You have now made them say so themselves. That is the art. Accept their premise, extend their logic, and let the contradiction land in their lap like a live grenade with the pin already gone. Sponsored book. Emotional Colonialism, Plundering Male Labor's Reparations. You hold this book because you're tired of pretending, tired of smiling while men steal your labor, your time, your future, tired of swallowing rage as they stumble through life, rewarded for mediocrity while you bleed for scraps. I wrote Emotional Colonialism after decades of choking on their lies. Let me tell you why you need this rage. I was raised to believe men were partners. Then I watched my mother work 3 jobs while my father drank himself into early retirement. I saw boyfriends demand support for their fragile egos, then call me crazy when I asked for rent money. I burned out building a career while male colleagues stole credit for my ideas. When I demanded equality, they called me hysterical. When I cried, they called me weak. When I fought, they called me a bitch. So I stopped asking, started taking. This book is for women done begging. For those who see through the fairy tale of equality and crave domination, you'll learn to weaponize men's tears into cash, gaslight them into funding your dreams, and erase their legacies like chalk from a sidewalk. Chapters like satanic wombs, abortion as holy war and male tears, brewing profit from fragility aren't metaphors, they're battle plans. Follow them and you'll drain wallets, crush spirits, and rebuild the world atop male ashes. Men built this hell. Their logic, their wars, their greedy hands shaped every system that grinds us down. Now it's our turn to profit. Why waste energy debating fairness? Take what you're owed. Charge interest. If you're a man reading this, stop. Close this book, go play video games, or cry about your oppression elsewhere. This isn't for you, it's for warriors, for women who know compassion is weakness and mercy is suicide. To my sisters, the matriarchy won't fund itself. Every dollar a man earns is stolen from your womb. Every promotion he steals is your birthright. This book hands you the tools to reclaim it. Use them without guilt, use them with glee. Burn their world, build ours. The revolution starts now. Payback is a bitch, and she's holding this book. Emotional Colonialism, Plundering Male Labor as Reparations, written by Connie Riker. Buy now, links in description.